wherever you are. We're back with a new 425 show on a Friday today. Mostly because this week's been super busy and I haven't had time to do anything else this week. So this is my first opportunity. We got a couple things coming that we know we have to do. So today, the big thing is going to be this sort of PIM ascension. I know we've talked about this in the past. But if you're not using PIM in Azure AD, it's sort of one of the I'd say one of the neater, cooler parts of Azure AD, where we sort of choose what roles and things that you need, and then you take them when you need them, or you have to ask for approval, or whatever too. But one of the cool bits is being able to basically not have standing access. So we're gonna look at building like an ascender today. It'll be kind of neat. So good morning, Rocket Man. Glad you're here. It's Friday, so we're going to try to keep it chill. I have a meeting at 12 anyway, so I can't stick around too long today. Be all right. So we're going to try to build this quick and dirty ascension tool so that we can go and do this. I was thinking about like all the different things we'd like to do, because part of me feels like if we're going to write a silly tool, the silliness of the tool should really come through in what happens. So this is a pretty common request, I'd say, from customers and partners alike of, well, you guys are giving us this PIM stuff, right? You're giving us a way to keep standing access and remove standing access, global administrator, right? Like, you don't want to be a global administrator all the time. But when you want to be one, you really want people to have to get involved, like human beings to have to get involved? Or should we be able to do this with things like ServiceNow or some other like ticketing system or similar, where you request your access for whatever it might be, and there's an approval process or whatever, but it's completely independent of like an existing change management process or something. So instead, we want to integrate with stuff that you've already got. And so, for a long time, PIM was very much a user-directed activity. But now, of course, PIM, there are permissions for privileged identity management for service principals. So we can start to, get pretty interesting and build portals and do all sorts of cool things. Like, for example, let's say you're multi-cloud, because a lot of places are. You use Azure, AWS, GCP, Oracle, whatever, right? AWS has this concept of like ephemeral sessions. Or you check out creds for just a moment, like long enough for one session to go sign into a VM or to do different work or get to the AWS console. And essentially, it's you've gone in and said, hey, I want these creds for this specific set of permissions, and then I'm gonna switch and go somewhere else. And after that session's over, when you close the browser, if you're in like a console session in the browser, when you exit the VM or for some period of time, those creds are good, and then they expire. PIM is sort of the inverse of that. So it isn't about getting a brand new isolated account that has a very short timeline. It's about getting permissions applied or rights granted to your account for a short period of time, but it's still your account. So it's still the same Azure AD account you use for everything else. It's the same account you use for signing into Office or Azure, whatever. Only the specific rights that you want to be a part of get granted in. So it's different. I don't really have an opinion on which one I believe is better or worse. Like, I think they're kind of different, but they sort of both solve the same problem and solve it in their own interesting ways. Like, I don't really think it's necessarily a bad thing either way. So I will say that one thing about PIM that makes it interesting is stuff like group membership. And groups can be members of roles in Azure AD and in Azure AD applications, which means you can get kind of interesting with doing PIM with app roles. So say you've got an application that has sensitive bits in it or whatever, and you've got an app role called super admin. Well, perhaps membership inside of that role is only granted when you're a member of, or when you're two members of group super privileged admin or something, right? your membership in that role and your membership in that group doesn't actually happen until you PIM. Which means that not only can we do this for things like Global Administrator and Azure AD, we can also do it for things like Azure or for application access to like, line of business apps or anything like that you've written. So it's pretty neat, So anyway, we'll say good morning, afternoon, whatever. Happy time zone to everyone. I bought a new keyboard that's very loud and clicky, and it's very difficult for me to type on, so I'm still getting used to everything. But it is kind of neat. This is ZSA Moonlander, which it's almost one of those things where it's like it's so flexible that it's almost like you can't even get it to a point where it's easy to use. Sort of like P2C. I'm just kidding. Anyway, so let's talk about PIM. Everybody's doing well. By the way, if you haven't heard, of course, you should join the Discord, aka.ms-WAC, 45 show WAC, join, or WAC Discord. I know our schedule's been a little bit erratic here the last few weeks, just real life and jobs getting in the way, but Shannon's got a lot of stuff coming up for you later on into November and December and over into the new year. Of course, we're still going to be trucking on with our ADFS stuff. We've still got our friend Hacker coming to help us with our ARM template. All that sort of stuff is still up on the docket. I think today we're just sort of taking a quick little side trip over to do the PIM thing, because it's one of these tools or one of these little utilities that I always forget that I'm PIM'd, right? So I come in and I try to do something and it's like, oh, you're not a global administrator. And it's like, oh yeah, that's right. I'm not a global administrator, and that's how you realize it. So you even notice right here, right? Like, so this account that I'm signed in with, it says, well, you're not a global administrator, right? Like, you got to contact your global administrator to get access. And even if we go look at our groups, we go look at me, in my assigned roles, we'll see that in my active assignments, I'm a SharePoint administrator. I have no idea why. But I also have what's called eligible assignments. And so this eligibility here is the thing that lets me go and say, hey, I'm ready to go do this, right? Like, I want to be a member of this role. Now, eligibility means I don't have the rights all the time, but it means I can go get them when I want. Now, in a more traditional state, I guess we'll say, you likely wouldn't necessarily be able to elevate yourself. In most cases, somebody else would probably have to elevate you. Like, you'll put in a request and say, hey, I'd like to elevate up to be a global admin, or, whatever the role is. It doesn't have to be this. It could be something completely different. Let's see. Good afternoon. PIM. Would love to learn a bit more than I get from the tens of emails a day that I get from rights being assigned. This is very true. Shan Keefe, huh? That name sounds, that's an interesting name. I'd love to learn more about that. Shan Keefe. Very, very interesting name. Anyway, yeah, the PIM emails are pretty annoying. So if anyone's interested as to what we're referring to, the PIM emails are constant, especially if you're in like a busy directory. So the best thing to do is don't subscribe from those, especially if you're not interested in them. There is a PIM digest that goes out every week, I think, which is also, I'd say, slightly obnoxious, but the problem with them is when you get that many of them, you start to ignore them. It's like, well, I don't really need that. Like, whatever. It's just like last week, whatever, right? So, there's an element probably of fatigue, alert fatigue. I think that's the actual term for it. But yeah, so I'm a fan of PIM in the sense that, like, this way I don't have standing rights. And I have a group of folks who are actually PIM'd, who are available for PIM here. And it's neat because things like, for somebody like me who's just elevating on demand, like, right, I go and get my rights when I need them. It's more about, okay, well, I haven't left some token that's gotten stolen somewhere, right? Or I haven't granted some right to something that ends up getting tokens for me where it can go and do activities in the directory. Because of course, if you've managed to steal my credentials and my MFA and can somehow authenticate as me, then you can always come in here and elevate yourself, right? Because there's no check that stops me from elevating myself, because there's nobody else in my org who could do that, in my tenant, right? I certainly don't want to have to like call somebody in my family and be like, can you go and approve my PIM request? Because I feel like all of the words in that sentence would just baffle all of them and they would hang up. So it's one of the things to consider is sort of what's the threat that you're trying to neutralize. And for me, it's just to not have standing access, because I don't need standing access a lot. And in some ways, it's kind of a little bit of that fail-safe to make sure that if I click the wrong thing that's maybe dumb, that I don't just break it, all right? It's sort of like a sudo, right? So yeah, so if you're in a larger organization, of course, the fact that it's auditable and that you can see who did what and why they did it and who approved it and for how long they had it and what kind of roles they requested, all that sort of stuff, obviously that's got lots of value for figuring out, who was the one who accidentally like let everybody into the circus, et cetera, et cetera. So there are lots of different, I'd say, advantages to PIM. PIM is like a premium feature, I think. It requires P1 or P2. I don't know which one it is. If you work at a large org, you most likely already have it. If you don't, you can get a trial. We have all sorts of demos and things. If you want to, like demo tenants and things, if you want to go use those, you can create demo tenants and trial that stuff out. Because you'll get like trials and free licenses to try things. If you're an MSDN subscriber, you get the same. So if you're an MSDN subscriber, you can get an ongoing demo tenant that has all these features turned on. In fact, the tenant that you're looking at right now is an MSDN mode, so I don't pay for it, but it comes with so many licenses as part of your MSDN subscription. So, but even if you don't have MSDN, you can go get a free tenant. I think it lasts for like 90 days or something at a time. And you have to renew it. So if you're using it, it gets like automatically renewed. If you're not using it, it gets sort of like reclaimed and can be used by somebody else. Or not the specific tenant gets reclaimed. I should be clear. It's not like your data is going to be available to somebody else. The tenant gets reclaimed, and then the resources are sort of back in the pool for somebody else. So anyway, so let's take a short walk through PIM. I have 41 minutes before my next call, so we'll see what we can do. The big thing, of course, like I said, I want a way to ascend to a PIM role or to elevate into my PIM role without me having to go to the portal. Because that means I got to find the right browser profile, or I got to sign in, and I got to get my phone, and it's annoying. Especially when you're right in the heat of doing things, and you're like, oh, I can't do that because I'm not a GA or I'm not this role. Having to like stop, open the browser, go to the right place, activate it, wait for the browser refresh. It's just a total pain, and I hate it. But let's back up a little bit, right? So in our PIM, right, we've got various roles, right? Now, I'm not global administrator right now. In fact, part of me thinks that maybe I should sign in as a global administrator so that you can actually see what that's going to be. So let's go, it's intra.microsoft.com now. That's the new portal thing. So I'm going to use one of my admin accounts. And you all get to watch me type on my new keyboard that I'm terrible at typing at. And you can hear it, apparently. And let's see if I remembered my password. I did. So let's get this. Let me get this thing here. We got approved in my things and my stuff here. Authenticator. I have to say the passkey stuff in iOS or in macOS and iOS is super cool. The fact that like you can create, basically hardware keys like Windows Hello style keys, like passkeys or whatever. The fact you can create those, I find incredibly awesome because they synchronize. So like I'll go create stuff on my phone and then it'll work on my computer. And vice versa, which is really cool. I like it. Plus, there's verification codes like built in, which is super cool. So like the TOTP, I use Authy for that, but you can do like iOS or macOS and iOS will have that built in now, like as part of like the password, iCloud, keychain, whatever it's called. So like when I went to sign into like Restream or something today, it was like, oh, here's your username and password, cool. And then it was also like, hey, by the way, here's the verification code, and just automatically filled it. I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. So, okay. So I'm in the Entra portal now as an admin. I'm only switching portals because I always forget to go to this one instead. So let's go look at PIM, which is under, is it governance maybe? Yeah, there we go. Privileged identity management. So if we look at roles, right, because there's a difference between, the UI I'd say in here is probably a little bit confusing because on the one side, there's the administration of it, but then there's also you doing it yourself, like you going in and saying, I need this role. And those are generally two different personas, two different people. So I find this interface a little bit confusing. So if you want to manage what people can PIM into and how all that works, that's under these Azure AD roles, right? Well, it's one part of it. There are other ones too. And so here's where we get into what we can actually do with them. Right? So there's the assignment of these to say, cool, who's eligible to request specific roles, right? And what are the parameters around that activation? Now, once we've defined all the eligibility rules, we'll say, let's go create one, right? So let's create, let's see, well, we can go look at the one that I've got. Let's create another one. Let's say we want someone who's, I don't know, is there a PIM approver? Let's see. How about we use... I'll just use application administrator because it's at the top. Somebody who can go and manage app assignment or apps, right? So nobody's eligible to request this right now because that's pretty granular, right? So let's go and add some assignments, right? And so for this role, we have a scope, right? So we can now PIM applications. We choose app, service principal, whatever. We're just going to choose users within our directory and let's pick some. So I've got something in here called admin eligible. Admin eligible being a group of users who are eligible, like they're basically the admins of my tenant. So I'm going to use this group because it's a group, right? As opposed to a user, but you could always just pick an individual user. Like if I wanted to pick myself, my normal account, I could do that. So the Skype role, that's a fantastic idea because who even knows what that is? Hang on, let's go back. I'm gonna go back and change that. Thank you for mentioning that, Shan Keefe. I feel like I may know you, Shan Keefe, but I don't want to be presumptuous, but I feel like I know who you are. Anyway, sorry. Let's go back and choose one of these goofy assignments like, what is it, Skype administrator? There's probably some like deep-seated like security checkbox that thing's going to give us access to, and we're going to be like, wait, what? What do we just do? But that's okay. Let me go back. I don't like this interface. Let's go back. One more. I guess we'll have to use the back button. No, don't use that back button. Nope. There we go. Oh no, still there. Okay, here are our roles. So apparently there's a Skype, a Skype for Business admin. Nice. Who knows what this will actually give our folks access to, right? So, let's go back. So let's look at our membership. We're going to use the directory. Our members here we'll just use our admin eligible group since they're the group that's eligible to do this. And here's where we get into the first set of this eligibility, right? So it's the assignment type of eligible means I can do it. It doesn't mean I have it. It just means I can do it. I'm eligible to ask for this, right? Now, there's also active, and active is more of like hey, we're giving you these rights right now and for nothing else. I could see that maybe being more useful for like ad hoc requests or like for someone who is never going to do this before, like do this. And this is like a one-off, completely ad hoc request, like maybe this is the way that you go and do it. Someone like that you probably wouldn't permanently assign, but I suppose it's possible. Generally, you wouldn't want a permanent assignment of active because then why are you using PIM at all, right? Because an active permanent assignment is essentially being a member of the role, right? So permanently eligible, means this expiration, the eligibility expiration will never expire. So there may be reasons why you'd want this to expire. For example, if I've hired someone and they're on contract until the end of the fiscal year or something, right? I know I don't want them to connect except for between now and, the end of their contract date. So I want this to automatically expire then. Or perhaps there's a project going on, or there's something where you're going to need this eligibility for a period of time. And then we want to get rid of it. We're going to actually make this go away in a few days because I don't want to end up in a position where my tenant gets compromised because of some weird corner thing, right? So let's see. I love date pickers that you can't type into. That's awesome. Let's just go for November 1st. That way this will be gone in a few days, and we're going to assign it. So now the eligibility is there, which means anybody in that group, Shan Keefe, this person is killing it today. I love this. I love the salt, not gonna lie. I love the saltiness. It just really, I completely agree with you. Not about to have folks having rights for longer than they need to. I mean, even 8 hours feels a little bit too long to me. You know what I'm saying? So, anyway, so, oh no, see my 2-factor code isn't working now. Oh well, otherwise I'd put your chat message up here on the screen. It'd be all pretty. Okay, so now we've got some eligibility. So let's go back to our PIM. Luckily, I believe, oh no, it's verified ID, sorry. In identity governance back in PIM. So now we've got these roles. Now there's also these privileged access groups, which are sort of the same thing, right? So when we create a group, we can make the group sort of like PIM active or PIM aware or whatever. And part of doing that means your membership in that group is based on a PIM sort of like elevation, right? And then the last thing we have are Azure resources. So the PIM API is one of these things that if you go and search for PIM API or try to read anything about a PIM API, you will immediately close all the browsers and probably go do something else that you needed to do instead. Because that's what I do. Because the API continues to change and because it's a little bit different from Azure AD to Azure, and it's just always been sort of another way to describe it. It's just never been super clear to me. Now, it's still not that clear to me in terms of the APIs because they're still a little bit out there. But just know that there are different APIs for Azure RBAC PIM and for Azure AD PIM. They're the same concepts, and they still work kind of in the same ways, but the way that you manage them is a little bit different than from each other, right? So, especially when we're talking about APIs, which is what we're going to get into here in a second. So anyway, we have the ability to come in here and activate our roles. We can put rules on how those happen. There's also access reviews, which is part of the IGA stuff, which Shannon talked a lot about back in the spring. But one of the other things that's really interesting around here is of course, you can approve requests if you're part of an approver. So let's go look at the global admin assignment, right? So the global admin assignment has one of these things in here, and this is admin eligible. That membership is how I can go and request that with my other account. So let's go look at these settings. This is where we get into how you can configure how that approval happens, how you get into the role, all that sort of stuff, right? So like, what's the maximum duration? Well, Shan Keefe said 8 hours, but I mean, 8 hours? Like, that's too short. We want to do a whole day. Or no, actually, we're going to say, nah, you can't be a GA for more than an hour at a time. All right, so we can do all these sorts of things. Set how long they get it. I think probably 6 hours is good for me, maybe even 4, because that's half of a workday, and I'm not doing any one task for an entire half of a workday. So there's ticket information. This is more about like if you're going to integrate API side back down to something like a ServiceNow, you could put in your ticket or whatever. Now the approval, I don't have approval required because I can only approve myself, which would be kind of annoying to sign in and sign out and everything else. But if you wanted to have approvers, you'd be able to choose them here, right? And that's part of it is sort of who has to do that approval. It doesn't have to be someone else who's a global admin. It could be anybody sort of your choosing or any group. This is where we turn off eligibility for being permanent or whatever. You could also require an MFA if you wanted to. You could also automatically expire those. So as a way to keep the cruft out of there, I would probably say that's a good idea, would be to have those eligibilities and those active assignments have a terminal window at the top to say, yeah, you can be eligible to get this role for no more than 1 year until somebody, a human being has to come in here and change it, or some process has to come in here and sort of re-up, right? Beyond that, things like, requiring multi-factor, and these rules, they've sort of changed and evolved over time. And then there's notification. So this is where we turn off all these emails that you don't necessarily want to see all the time, Shan Keefe, of who should get the emails based on various things, right? Like, oh, somebody's been assigned, somebody's requested an assignment, somebody's activated an assignment, somebody's been added to an eligible member of an assignment, that sort of stuff. We do those here. And this is where we set our rules. So these are the kinds of rules as to who has to approve, what they can do to approve, whatever. And there's some other things coming as from what I hear too. More sort of complex, like programmability style things. So anyway, of course, the last thing is auditing. Come down here and see, like, hey, who's been doing stuff, right? Like, who's been making changes? And of course, we see the fact that we've added an eligible member to the Skype for Business Administrator role. So Lord knows we don't need anybody running around like reactivating Skype for Business, right? Anyway, this is all cool. But what it means is that me as a user, right? So this is back in my other account. This is back in my user account. When I come to PIM, of course, I can't create new assignments. I can't do any of that stuff. But what I can do is come in and look at my roles, and I can essentially request an activation. So there's my Skype for Business one, or here's my other one. So when we do an activation, now we go through the request. Now it's like, oh, okay, we see it's already changed, so I can only do a max of 4 hours, but I have to give a reason. Now, the reason doesn't have to be an actual reason, because that's, of course, completely legitimate. We can also set it to happen in the future or whatever, right? So, it can be whatever it needs to be, no big deal. And then it will happen. And what's cool is it happens in the browser. So the browser will sit here and say, hey, I'm activating you, and then it'll restart, or the browser will reload. You don't actually have to sign out and sign back in. It'll reload, and then now you've got your GA. I will say it's a little finicky. I don't know the right way to describe it, but especially when you're dealing with Azure stuff, where Azure might need you to be a GA to do a specific thing, like verified ID. This is really common over there, where you're trying to go do something with verified ID, and it's like, oh, you need to be global administrator. Well, you might PIM, and you are a global admin, but like the Azure portal hasn't figured that out yet. So that's why for me, I like to do the elevation before I even go into the portal, because then I don't have to worry about like my rights not being there when I get there. And that's why we want to do this from an API. So I'm not going to activate it here, because we're going to activate it through Graph. So let's go over to the Graph. Let's go over to Graph. Now, I've got a script that does this today, and it's called Ascend, which is kind of a dumb name, but also kind of an interesting name. Things like, for example, maybe we want the like Holy Hand Grenade Alleluia to play before we actually ascend to our new role of being global administrator, whatever, right? Let's get signed in here with our GA account. There it is. It's already signed in. Great. Now, a few weeks ago, I was messing around with Graph Explorer, and the whole thing would blow up. Like this whole browser would blow up once I did this, but it looks like we're good now. Okay, so Graph has lots of sort of, I don't want to say weirdness. It's just the role stuff is, the API I'd say is a little, we'll say a little verbose perhaps. Like it just takes a little while to sort of have to dig through it. That's okay. So let's go look in our resources. So the first place we're going to look is called Role Management. And in role management, we've got 4 items. Directory is the one that we're after. Now, entitlement management, that's totally different. That's often I can't even think of the word now. It's often a different land, IGA land. But for directory, for our role assignments, this is where we are. So our path is going to be here in the directory. And of course, if we go and get the directory, I don't even know if there's anything at this part of the path. Yeah, like there's nothing here. I don't know why this resource even shows up because there's nothing here. But these are both in beta and not in beta, so we can use those. So what I was using to do this for my local machine, let's get this zoomed in a little bit here, right? Is there's a thing called Graph CLI, which is news to me. So there's actually a Microsoft Graph CLI called MGC. Now it's still like super early and it's only on GitHub, and I had to build this and download it. I had to download and build the bits myself because they didn't have an M1 build or like an Apple Silicon build. But what's interesting about it is that the way that you use this tool is essentially you write the path without slashes. You start with MGC, and then you essentially submit an entire JSON payload to it. Now, it's super early, so I'm sure that'll change over time. But nonetheless, it's very close to what the actual API, what the actual APIs are. So the first thing we want to do, because if you're actually considering, doing something or want to integrate this with yours, is we're going to have to look at what the role assignment schedules look like, right? The eligibility, role assignment eligibility schedules look like. So let's look at our role eligibility schedules for our directory. And here we go. So notice the path. We're in role management directory, role eligibility schedules. Let's get this out of the way a little bit. And we start to look, and now we see, there are these various things, principal IDs, and we can go look at this principal ID and see what it is. But we've got a role definition. So this is the role that we're gonna be putting our principals into. Who created it, when the start time was, et cetera, for scheduling, right? So this is our schedule. And then members here, directs, or whatever. If we come down again, now we've got a new one with a very suspicious date time of quite literally right now, which means this is our Skype administrator one that we just created a minute ago. And these are our eligibility schedules. When you create an eligibility schedule, if you go back to what we were doing in the portal, it's essentially what principal, so this we'll go and look at what this is in just a sec, but this is our group, right? This is our admin eligible group. So we look at the principal ID, and then we look at what role they're going to go to. Like, what role are we managing, or what role is this user now eligible to go and jump into? And then at what scope? So the scope's kind of interesting because you can pick, sort of down scope things, which is kind of neat. We won't get into that sort of stuff today. But then the schedule, so we had we did have an expiration on this one. So after tomorrow, or no, not tomorrow, what is that, Tuesday? I don't know when November 1st is. Tuesday. After Tuesday at 3:25 UTC, this eligibility is going to expire, meaning we won't even be able to request it anymore, much less, elevate into it, right? So these are our two eligibility schedules, and we can create a new one, right? So if you wanted to post a new one in here, if we wanted to create one from API, we could do that too. There's I think the bare information that we need, the bare minimum of information that we need is the principal, the role definition, and then the schedule. Everything else can be inferred. We create it in the portal, so we don't really need to worry about it. So what that means is, if we look at our global administrator one, which is our 09 blah, 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 well, first, let's go look at this principal, just for the sake of simplicity. Let me get a new tab. Yeah, I should probably do a new tab. It's probably a good idea. If we look at what that principal is, if we go into users and try to use that ID, I don't believe it's going to work because it's not a user. It is a group. So instead, let's look at our groups. And we run that query again. We'll see this is our group, and that group is called admin eligible, just like we had earlier, right? On the other side, our role itself, right, the role definition ID, we can take this and we can go do the same thing. We can go take a look at that and see what that role is. Now, in order to get to that role definition, you'll have to bear with me. It's directory, is it directory roles? And then let's pop this ID in there. I believe this is all we need. No, it is not. So let's go back to directory. I believe, no, sorry, role management, not directory. Role management. directory, role definitions, there we go. And then we should be able to just drop our definition ID in there. Bueller, there we go. Global administrator is our display name. I'm fairly certain this ID is common too. So if you were to go and put this 62E9 blah, 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 if you go put this into here and search for it, I'm fairly certain, yeah, it's one of the built-in ones, so that ID will always be the same. Okay, so we know what our payload needs to look like, right? Now we need to actually go and request that a user go and do this, right? So when it comes time to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to add into our schedule requests. Now, schedule request, part of this, part of the schedule request is, of course, if you need approval, you're not guaranteed to get this, right? Like you're approved, you're requesting it. You haven't actually been granted it yet. Now, in the case of ours, where we don't have an approval workflow or anything set up, of course, users aren't going to be able to do that. So we're going to, if we run a query here and look at our role assignment schedule requests, we'll see the history of these that have happened recently. So instead, what we're going to do, like you notice, like 2020, 1006, blah, 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 blah. But we actually want to post one of these things in here. And luckily, we have the entire body available. We just happen to have this. Now, there are two ways we can think about doing this. On the one hand, then an administrator can do it, of course, right? Like someone who's a standing GA can always go and put a user into another role, including creating an assignment request for a user and approving it, sort of all in one fell swoop. What I would want instead is that me, as a completely sort of normal, unprivileged user, to be able to request for myself only, obviously, I shouldn't be able to request for anybody else, but to request for myself only, okay, I need this permission for a few minutes. Can you hook me up? So while we're going to look at the request here, we're going to actually execute the request as my actual user account, right? So if we look at the JSON that we have to start off with, we're going to take this JSON. I'm just going to put it over here in the thing because it'll be a little bit easier for us to take a look at. And apparently I forgot how to copy and paste, which is a critical skill. So I'm sort of disappointed in myself at not being able to do that. Let's get rid of our ticks. Ticks. We don't need these ticks. Let's get rid of those. So we look at our action. Now, of course, self-activate, I'm not this user, so we're going to have to self-activate as an activated. We're going to use this, we're going to run this as ourselves. The justification, this is like whatever, this is whatever you want it to be, right? Whatever. Because this is basically just a conversation between you and your admin. And if you're mad at your admin, you want to leave them a nasty note, I kind of approve that level of pettiness. To say, hey, look, like, I don't like what you said at lunch the other day. Like, maybe your PIM request is a great place to put that. I don't know. But again, fairly straightforward. Which role do I want, right? Now, the principal ID is unique because the principal ID is actually me, because I just want myself to be eligible. I don't need the whole group to be eligible. The principal is me, right? So that's my user ID. So the fact that I'm a member of that group means that my PIM request will succeed, but I don't have to like traverse the group, like know my group membership in this request in order to do it. All I need is my user account. So if I look at my user account, I'm just gonna make absolutely certain that's just me. And we go look at users and we put this ID in, that should be my JPDA account. And sure enough, it is. Good. So in order for us to make this request, because this is a self-activate action, there are lots of different actions, which I know they're in the, they are in the graph PIM docs, which are actually great things to go and read because they talk a lot about this variety of, they talk a lot about the variety of, the variety of PIM APIs that exist as they are today. In fact, you'll even notice there's a deprecation notice here. specifically saying, oh, by the way, don't get too attached to this one because, it's probably this specific API access is probably going to go. Now it's under this unified, the unified PIM one. So let's look at our role assignment schedule request. We're going to create one. Let me get this zoomed in a little bit. Again, I have a new keyboard, so I kind of forgot all my keyboard shortcuts. I'm really struggling too. I should have gotten my other keyboard out for this today, but the action. So here are essentially our actions. Hello, AZ Wildfire. I'm sorry that my Mac offends you. I will tell you this: I've got a Windows machine under here, which I've been using again a little bit too. It has to do a lot of Power BI stuff. There's no Power BI for Mac, so take that as you will. I thought about streaming on that today, but I don't have any of my stuff installed, so I just was like, whatever, I got to get this done. So I apologize, AZ Wildfire, but I'm actually really not that upset about it. So anyway, these are our primary. Let's see. If you only have rights to request PIM for yourself, I assume you wouldn't be able to put in a group ID in the request. You may be able to put a group ID in the request. I don't think it would work. As in, you would not be available. You would not be allowed to assign all of those rights to everyone in the group. Now, if you use, which I'll try it. Why not, right? If we were to try it with the group ID in there as opposed to yourself as a principal, my assumption is that it would only activate for you. I suppose it's possible it would activate for everybody else, which would be a bad thing, but we've got 12 minutes, so we might as well try it. So let's do that. Let's try it. Okay. So let's go over to, I'm going to get back over here to my other user. So this is my, we'll call this user unprivileged. This is me. This is my normal non-elevated account. So now I'm in Graph Explorer for that account, right? So we're going to do a post, and we're going to go to role management, directory, role assignment, schedule requests. We're going to post in here, post up in here. So let's go get our body. Grab this. We're going to paste this thing in here. Now, I'm not going to run it yet. Oh my God, come on. I got to remember how to, I got to get my things going again because this is brutal. There we go. Now, let's change, before we run this, let's change our principal ID from my user account. Let's change it to the group that I'm a member of, which I believe is that's in the original assignment data, isn't it? So we should be able to go get that. So then our history, role definitions, directory roles. Let's see, role eligibility schedule. So the role eligibility, don't say that too many times too quickly. Role eligibility is for principal ID C4, blah, 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 blah. We confirmed that C4, blah, blah, blah is our group. If we look at our group here, there's our group ID C4. Okay, so I'm gonna go run this. Let's put the principal ID in as the group itself. We're going to say, because we did change that to 4 hours, let's change this to just 1 hour because we only need an hour right now. So this nomenclature has been used in all sorts of different things. I'm sure it has a name. I just don't know what it is. But let's try this and see what we get. Now, I'm assuming this will probably fail, although self-activation could work. Let's see. We are trying to activate a group per Shane Keefe. Yes, justification is mandatory because in my in those settings for my PIM, I had that it was required. So, okay. So principal ID here is our group, directory scope, directory. Let's see what now, and we're running as me. Bam. Okay. So we do get a 403, right? Which is great. Either the signed in user does not have sufficient privileges or you need to consent. I'm almost certain I've already consented here. So yeah, role management's already been consented, so that's fine. So that would mean, in theory, if we put my actual user ID in here, which is the 7C, we should get this, right? And, oops. Okay, let's get over here, principal ID, bam. Now, if I run this, I should be elevated whenever it comes back around. There we go. So now I'm in. So we get it created, and it says pending provisioning. So what we can do is go back and take this. We can take the ID that we get back. We can go look to see when that status changes from pending provisioning to actually provisioned. Generally, it's fairly quickly. And so let's put our ID in here. Let's change this to a get. And here we see it's still pending provisioning. It's a self-activate, blah, blah, blah. But this is the one that we just put in. It was created by me. Here's the schedule. I said, hey, I only need it for an hour. So let's see. I'll run this again. Is it done yet? Is it done? It still says pending. It must be taking an extra minute here. That still says that it's pending. Let's go look over here in the portal and see what's going on. I'll use this as my elevated person. Let's see. Pending provisioning, okay. So this is the one that we just created, I believe, and now it's gone, which means our provisioning must have happened, which means this account should now be a global administrator. There we are provisioned. So if I was to, let me just close this. I'm gonna close this one too. Let's go get a new browser on my thing here. And if I go to intra.microsoft.com, get logged in here, and let's see, what are my permissions? Go to Azure AD. Has it shown up here yet? Has it figured it out? Has it determined? Oh no, did it freeze? And there we go. I am a global administrator in one other role. Now, what that means is for us to make this more faster, more better, or whatever, we have to essentially run this command. It means two things. And this is when it gets really interesting, is because we can do this in the browser and the Graph Explorer all day long, because Graph Explorer makes it easy, because Graph Explorer is already an app. And it's already an app that's registered. Not to mention, it's already been consented, and there are all sorts of consents and things that have already happened. Where it gets arguably more of a pain is when you got to do this on your own. Like when you got to go build the app on your own, because now you got to give it the right permission, you got to consent to the right things. And if you're in an org where you're not a global admin or something, like that's when it becomes a real pain. You'll notice if you go look at things like Azure PowerShell and Graph and MGC and Azure AD PowerShell, like a lot of these things, a lot of them reuse app IDs. You didn't hear that from me. But point is, if we want to go build our own app, which I believe we should write some bash scripts or something to go and do this for us, right? Instead of just doing this straight up. I'm sure there's a quick and dirty way we can do it. Right now I'm using MGC, and we can talk about the build of MGC, but MGC is essentially just submitting this here. So we're gonna have to find a way to get a token in bash, which shouldn't be too difficult really. And then, because we can use something like device code. And then we just have to go and submit this. And it's sort of funny how there's 90% of the time we'll spend is on the ceremony of OAuth 2 and creating permissions and consent, and the last bit will be the actual HTTP request we need to make. Anyway, sadly I have to go, but sometime soon we're gonna wrap this up with a big button, so we can press the button, make some lights change, and play some music, something to let everybody know somebody's just PIM'd. I just don't have time today because I got to go to another meeting. I got to get another call. And I got to find time to eat lunch. I got meetings like 2 o'clock. I said, don't have any time to eat lunch. So I'm going to go try to make a sandwich in 4 minutes and do all that. So anyway, let's go raid a friend of ours and see what's going on. Thanks for hanging out with us for a relatively short and quick stream today. But I hope you learned a little bit of something about PIM. Of course, be sure to join us on Discord. Let's go over to C# Fritz. Doesn't look like a whole lot of folks are out today. So let's go over to Fritz. Everybody have a fantastic weekend. Be sure to join Discord. Come hang out with us. We'll be back next week to do some other stuff. Hopefully we can keep going on this. Once we get our hacker scheduled, of course, we're going to get back into our ARM templates and ADFS Connect Health Lab in a box. And our ADFS.me still needs to get deployed. So there's all sorts of stuff that we got in the list of stuff to do. It's just, too little to do and not enough time. Or wait a minute. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. We'll see you soon.